You're muted, Lucy.
The classic Zoom response these days, right? You're muted. I think I should be permanently muted after to this morning. So welcome everyone. I apologize for the delay. It's completely my undoing. I noticed that there was a problem with the link to this room earlier this week, and I thought I had fixed it. Clearly, I had not. And so there was a little bit of a delay while I sent, I think I sent it by carrier pigeon to South Africa, where Babs is located, and we're here and we're good to go. And I'm so excited to introduce Babs to you. I had a more formal introduction, and it will take a little while, so I'm going to skip to that and let you get right to your presentation. But I want everyone to know that you are part of an organization that I'm involved with. The Charter for Compassion is one of Babs's side projects in addition to her own work. And they are a sponsor of this conference as well. And if you are interested, it is we'd love for you to get involved with the charter and be a part of all the educational activities that go on, including training for social emotional learning and all sorts of things. I am too incoherent right now to list all of them, but Babs is on our board of trustees, and we're so glad to have her here. So without further ado, I'm going to take it give you the stage, and I'll come back at the end and have a little chat with you to wrap things up. How's that sound?
Wonderful.
Okay. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Lucy, so much for the invitation. It's such a pleasure to be here, to join you all. I think that, this moment in time is one that's very important for us to be in the space where we can have these conversations, to really open up what we mean around the ideas of teaching, of learning, of understanding the world that we're living in, and particularly to create a world that we really believe can be the hope for the future. So I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about my journey and some of my work and what I hope can be a bit of a seed for change. But yeah, I'm very, very thankful for all of you being here. As Lucy has said, my name, well, she calls me Babs. Most people call me Babs, but my name is Babalwa Ngongolo. I wear many different hats, but I'm a design thinking coach. I'm a facilitator. I'm also a strategist. And my work is really at the intersection of innovation, of justice, and development. And my work is really rooted in civic leadership. It's rooted in education, it's rooted in peace building, and primarily in the conviction that transformation comes through generosity of imagination, of care, and of design. But if I'm being a little bit more truthful, I really just stand here as someone who has spent most of my life learning how to hold complexity very gently. And just that practice of how to recognize the fragile places in our world and still to insist on the possibility of transformation. I also like to describe myself as a storyteller, but I've moved a little bit away from that just because I'm practicing this idea of embodiment a lot more. And so instead of saying I am a storyteller, I am a story. And however we engage with that story, whether it's through telling or witnessing, what I really see to myself as is a story. And so today I will be using story and weaving it into what I share today as a way to elucidate some of the points that I'm hoping will land. And so my story to start this conversation is about something that happened last weekend. I'm part of a community called the Cape Town Interfaith Initiative, and we go on these interfaith hikes every 4 months or so. So for every season, we take a bit of a hike, and this is a hike where we are embedded in story, in silence, and this spirit that braids itself together in the shared practice of community and closeness. And so these hikes are not really about being athletic. It's not an athletic feat. They really are just pilgrimages of listening. And in this particular hike, along the path, we stop, we reflect, we take time to breathe, we take time to receive wisdom that invites us into awareness. And so on this particular hike at the final stop, a dear friend of mine and mentor, Reverend Pippa Jones, held out her reflection for the day. And she reflected on the cowpea. A cowpea is a seed, just for clarity. And I was really humbled by what she shared around what this is. A cowpea is an indigenous seed. It is known by farmers and elders across the African continent because it is indigenous here. And it is a seed that, unlike many others, does not demand perfect soil. It's a seed that does not wait for rich compost or ideal rainfall or the luxury of cultivated land. The cowpea grows where it is not supposed to grow. It pushes its way through the sandy soil, through rocky surfaces, through neglected ground that has not been tended. It is able to survive drought. It is able to survive heat. It is able to survive disregard, and still it grows. And as Reverend Pippa Jones was sharing this message of this cowpea, and as she spoke, I really felt something inside me say that this is actually the work. This is the teaching. This is the vocation. This is what learning should be. Because, for generations, we have been offered the metaphor of the seed that needs good soil. We've been told that learning requires a tended garden, prepared curriculum, stable structure, safe classrooms, abundant time. And we've been fed this idea that teaching can only thrive when the conditions are ideal, when the climate is calm, when the world is gentle enough to receive us. But that is not the world that we inhabit. It is not gentle at all. And so if we are to claim this cowpea as a metaphor for the work that we do, then we have to name truthfully, courageously, without hesitation, the actual nature of the terrain into which we are planting. Because in this moment, we are living through something that is not an accident of history. It is not a neutral landscape. It is not just changing times. We are teaching, we are learning, and we are leading in a world that is designed intentionally, structurally, to confuse, to distort, and to disorient. The terrain has been engineered to be inhospitable to knowledge. And so we must speak about the fact that we are living in a time that is marked by misinformation that's dressed up as legitimate discourse, as disinformation that's deployed as a weapon, as algorithmic coloniality, determining whose stories travel and whose stories disappear. It's a war on intellectualism, where nuance is mocked and complexity is punished. It's also racial capitalism. And this is where bodies are sorted, valued, and discarded according to global and historical hierarchies that are actually not driven by fact. We are living in the residue of colonization, where knowledge systems are still ranked, they are regulated, and they are policed. And they are, of course, constructed social hierarchies that thrive on division, on fear, and scapegoating. So this is not merely ideological background noise. These are the conditions in which we are having to do the work of learning and teaching and trying to make sense of the world. And these are the conditions in which we, as educators, as facilitators, as mentors, are expected to plant seeds. The world is distorted terrain. And to use a few of the examples that exist, particularly in our time, if we look at what is unfolding in Palestine, it's crafted in this idea of it being religious conflict. But it's not an inevitable feud between faiths. It is and has long been this ongoing machinery of displacement, of apartheid, of ethnic cleansing. Yet we are continuously told by global media, by political forces, that this is a religious binary, because that is the framing that serves political interests. Because a conflict, it's easier to digest than colonial violence. But if we call it what it is, we are forced to reckon with our own complicity. Most recently, within the language of genocide, we've seen reports about Nigeria, where extremist violence is flattened into a story of Christian persecution. that erases the political, the economic, and the ecological forces that are actually at play. And what this framing does is it obscures the reality of land disputes, of climate displacement, of state failure, and of course poverty. Because a simplified religious narrative keeps audiences comfortable and governance unaccountable. And even here in South Africa, where I am from, we've seen this resurrection of what we call swart gevaar, which is this old colonial logic of fearing the native that has now been repackaged as white genocide, as political rhetoric, and as sensational media. And this is a narrative that's designed to solidify collective anxiety, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that violence in South Africa is structural, it's systemic, and it disproportionately harms the poor and not the powerful. And we must remember that these framings are not accidents. They are tools. These are tools for maintaining racial hierarchies. They are tools for consolidating power. They are tools for controlling memory. These are tools for disciplining empathy. That really, genuinely, they're tools to ensure that we as the public never see clearly enough to mobilize meaningfully. And so I really want to say this very plainly, because I think in our current society, we confuse it a little bit. The reality is that our learners are not confused, they are being confused. Our communities are not misinformed, they are being misinformed. We are not teaching in chaos, we are teaching inside architecture. An architecture of distortion, an architecture of fear, and an architecture that hopes that something like the cowpea will fail, that the seed will give up before it breaks through the stone. But we still plant. And so, even though we are living through a global wave of epistemicide, which is the deliberate killing of knowledge systems, the silencing of our histories, the erasure of languages, the disciplining of memories, we are still able to do the work of planting the seeds. We must understand that what is happening right now happens through curricula that sanitizes things like colonization, through media that frames victims as aggressors, through algorithms that amplify rage but mute compassion, through policies that starve humanities departments while feeding industries of extraction. It happens through classrooms where learners must perform neutrality about injustices that shape their lives. And this is not, again, neutral. It's not accidental. It is something that Akili Mbembe names as necropolitical landscape, where power decides not only who lives and who dies, but whose knowledge is allowed to live and whose stories are left to die. And it is in this landscape where educators are not just teachers. We are counter-historians, we are interpreters, we are witnesses, we are midwives, we are builders of memory under siege. We're standing at the threshold. And so we must teach in a way that counters manipulation, in a way that exposes that architecture, in a way that names violence clearly, even when institutions prefer silence. And this is the politics of this inhospitable terrain. It's rocky, it's sharp, it's designed to cut. But we must remember that the cowpea still grows. That in this political moment, the contested terrain, this epistemically hostile ground, we can start to really ask the question of what kind of educators do we want to be? Do you want to be gatekeepers of the old order, caretakers of a dying curriculum, or seed planters of the stubborn, radical, defiant hope? And so I really want to speak about this a little bit more and really think about, if the terrain that we teach in is hostile, and if the framing that shapes our world is engineered to distort reality, how do we start to ask what the counterforce is? How do we start to think about how we build, how we plant? it just reminds me of, one of the sayings from our sisters and brothers of the cloth, that our weapons are not carnal, right? We don't fight distortion with distortion. We don't fight propaganda with propaganda. And we certainly don't fight epistemicide with silence. But our work is quieter. It might be a bit more subversive, but it is work that means that we build, that we construct, we midwife, we seed, we create openings in the stone. We offer language where there was once silence or muteness. We invite story where there was fear. And we hold space where there was erasure. And these are our weapons, the weapons of mass construction, if you will. I'm reminded by what Fieri taught us long before many of us even knew it and were doing it, right? In Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which I'm sure we've heard about quite a bit, he argues that education must be an act of liberation and not just the deposit of information into passive minds. It really is just about the idea of co-creating knowledge between a teacher and a learner. But I really want to focus on what Fieri writes in Pedagogy of Hope, because he clarifies something even more radical, right? That hope is not a feeling, it is not optimism, but rather that hope is discipline. That hope is a political act. That hope is the refusal to surrender imagination to the forces that profit from despair. Fieri insists that without hope, there is no struggle. Without struggle, hope becomes empty. And this, again, takes me back to that cowpea. Because the cowpea is hope as discipline. It's hope that works. It's hope that digs. Hope that roots itself in impossible ground. It doesn't survive because the soil is kind, but because the seed is stubborn. And so in my work, I've seen hope take shape, not as a sentiment, but as practice, as pedagogy, as construction. And I want to speak to that today. For me, hope is this story that a colleague shared with me. A colleague who, in many ways, metaphorically and in reality, stands in what we call the doorway. This year, I worked with a woman, a Black woman who is navigating predominantly white institutional spaces, who described her position as standing in the doorway, right? Not fully welcomed in the room, not fully embraced outside of it. Hands on the frame, body is in the threshold, absorbing microaggressions on one side and critique from her own community on the other. And yet she stands, right? She does not stand to guard the door. She stands to keep it open, to make sure that those coming behind her can enter with less bruising than she has endured. This is not just a metaphor to me. This is hope as labor, right? Hope as endurance, hope as political resistance in systems that were never designed to hold her dignity. And her doorway work taught me that first principle of hope, that hope is catalyzing. And for it to really take root, you have to believe in people. You have to believe that people are able to cross the threshold. You have to believe that they deserve to cross the threshold. You have to believe that they will carry others with them. And you have to believe this even when institutions give you every reason not to. And in many ways, this is the doorway where many educators stand. But of course, we cannot remain there forever. I'll speak about that a little bit later. Hope is generative as well. To me, it makes new worlds possible. And this was really shown to me, revealed to me in one of the programs that I facilitate. It's a leadership and climate justice program for young girls from under-resourced communities in Cape Town. And here I witnessed this generativity unfold in the smallest yet most transformative way. In this space, we're discussing language. Many of the girls entered the program exhausted by English. Their home languages are not English. In fact, English is the language of school. It's the language of correction. It's the language of coloniality. But here in this room, in this program, they could slip between isiXhosa, between isiZulu, or any of their home languages, and they were able to exhale. But what was happening is that even in this room of diverse people, language began to become a barrier. that even in embracing this comfort of being able to speak in one's own language, others were unable to understand. And so many of the students sat sometimes in silence because they could not join the swirl of isiXhosa or Afrikaans or the Cape Flat slang. And so without intervention, the very thing that was meant to be liberatory could have actually become exclusionary. So we took time to pause, we talked, we asked, what does inclusion require in this multilingual space? What does fairness sound like? And how do we hold each other with care? And they themselves designed a new agreement. They acknowledged the fact that anyone can speak in their mother tongue, but they must pause, they must translate, they must explain. In other words, they must bring others with them through the door. And this is not for the sake of surveillance, but it's for solidarity. And so by the end of that session, those girls who would quietly sit began to laugh. Something had shifted in the room. Language stopped being a boundary, language became a bridge. And so for me, this is hope as method. This is hope creating a new relational architecture in the room. Hope is generative. And you have to believe that something can change, right? You have to believe that language can be a tool and not a weapon, even when it is sometimes weaponized. That belonging, of course, can be co-created, and that even these young girls can build a new politic of fairness if we give them the space to. And so hope isn't something passive. It generates. We can name it. And when we do, it alters the soil. It makes the rocky ground a place where things are able to grow. And lastly, I want to speak about hope is power. There's a wonderful feminist writer who is Egyptian who speaks about hope being power. Her name is Naval al-Sadawi. And to me, this really is just the refusal to give up when systems depend on our surrender. And for me, I saw this power take shape during a culture workshop that I do for an African climate organization that I work with. This was a new team. The newer staff were navigating the legacy staff who were entrenched in their old ways of working. And there was tension in the room. Some voices were too loud, others were too silent, and some stories were heard and others were perpetually deferred. So I invited them into storytelling. Simple, open, human, not an icebreaker, an invitation to actually be inside the room. And what this did is that it allowed people who had been silent to begin to speak. Not necessarily loudly, and not with confidence at first, but with presence. And when one voice broke through, others followed. And the entire energy of the room calibrated, right? This wasn't just facilitation, it wasn't methodology, it was the possibility, again, the hope that if they spoke, someone might actually listen. And that cracked something open. So just like Nawal al-Sadawi said, we are able to be optimists because hope is power. Hope is the thing that breaks silence. It's the thing that interrupts erasure. It's the thing that refuses the architecture of necropolitics, the silent agreement that some people's lives, stories, and contributions matter less. And this, of course, brought home this idea that hope is power. You've got to understand that they are betting on all of us giving up, right? Systems of oppression rely on our exhaustion. They rely on our resignation. They rely on us believing that the threshold cannot be crossed. And so hope then becomes the most subversive power that we actually possess. And so in the face of algorithmic coloniality, of misinformation, of racial capitalism, of epistemicide, our counterforce is not only curriculum. It's not only content. It's not even just our presence. Our counterforce is hope, a disciplined hope, a generative hope, political hope that is embedded as practice. And again, hope is our cowpea seed, right? It's that seed that becomes our weapon of mass construction. Hope grows in the cracks of empire and it refuses to die. But this to me is rooted even more in the Southern African principle of Ubuntu. And I want to speak to it a little bit today because, when I speak of Ubuntu, I'm not speaking about a philosophy I encountered in a book or a leadership slogan that was picked up in an institutional corridor. I'm speaking of the world that raised me. I'm speaking of the Eastern Cape, of its open skies, its vast silence, of people who might speak softly but live loudly, of a wisdom that doesn't shout but shapes you quietly from the inside, right? I grew up in a community where Ubuntu isn't something you defined, it was something you lived. In isiXhosa, which is my language, we say that isiXhosa asitolikwa. In other words, there's some things that lose their meaning when translated, and Ubuntu is one of those things. Because Ubuntu is not to be kind. It is not that we are human because of others, although there might be an element of it. It also isn't this feel-good sentiment or moral instruction. Ubuntu is an epistemology. It's a way of knowing. It is an ethic. It's a way of valuing. It is organizing logic. It's a way to structure human life around relationship, around fairness, and around collective flourishing. Ubuntu is a pedagogy. It's a way of teaching that begins and ends with dignity. And it's only because I was raised in a community that I was raised in that I understand the depth of Ubuntu beyond the versions that often get misrepresented globally as compassion light, right? Or as this ethical decoration. Where I come from, Ubuntu is embodied. It is practical. It is something demanding, and it is always relational. I sometimes think of this example that comes from a friend of mine who spoke about when a child in their village has reached the age where decisions about education, for example, become pressing, the conversation does not begin with grades. The community doesn't ask who got the highest marks, who met the standard, or who deserves the opportunity. Instead, they ask who is the child, who is the individual. What do they fear? What excites them? How do they move through the world? And where will they thrive? And so, two children could stand before the community, the A+ child who's top of the class and the B student who's steady but not necessarily exceptional. And the outcome might surprise an outsider. The community is going to think, about the A+ child in their wholeness. Perhaps that A+ student suffers from deep anxiety in unfamiliar places, or perhaps the B student has resilience that's maybe forged through being able to roam the hills for lost sheep at dusk, unafraid of time, unfamiliarity, or even solitude. And so the community might say, we will send the B student, for example, abroad because we know that she will flourish. But we will send the A+ student to a local university because he will be held by familiarity, and that will allow his brilliance to unfold safely. By the metrics of our world, this looks illogical, right? But by the logic of Ubuntu, it is wisdom. It is attunement. It is fairness that is rooted in relationship and not abstraction. And this is the pedagogy of Ubuntu, to see people clearly before evaluating them, to know people deeply before deciding for them, to shape opportunity around the person and not the person around the opportunity. And so Ubuntu demands that we understand learning as something that is co-created, that is not imposed. It also reminds us that education is not about equality of input, it's about equity of care. It's not soft, it is precise, it is discerning, and it is rooted in the dignity of each learner. And so for me, this becomes really important when we think about the idea that I really want to talk to today, which is about holding the door open. And I thought I would talk about compassion, and compassion is very important. It's part of the work that I do. It's very much rooted in everything that I hope to do. But I want to speak about holding the door open. It's about this idea of who stands at the threshold. And I think that as educators, this is possibly one of the most important things that we can see ourselves as. People who open the door. People who, like my colleague, stand in the door. People who allow us to start to think about how we can allow more people to enter the space of becoming. But our work is more important than just standing at the door, because often what happens is that standing at the door means that we are actually becoming gatekeepers. Sometimes we become the people who decide who can enter and who cannot, whose voice is valuable, who we care for the most, who we think is more deserving. We make ourselves the middleman of opportunity, or middlewoman, of opportunity, of growth, of the ability for people to move from one room into the next. And so what I'm asking us today to do is to not stand as gatekeepers, to not stand as the guard, but to be attuned witnesses, to be rational guides, to actually be the seed planters. That in our threshold, we should not be the ones standing there. We should be the ones dropping that seed of hope, that seed of defiant resilience, that seed that can grow in the terrain of war, of confusion, of rejection, of anger, and whatever barriers exist that separate people into one room and into the other. And that we should allow that seed in that inhospitable terrain to grow, and for it to be the thing that holds the door open, that will then allow for people, for students, for learners to be able to make that choice for themselves about how they enter the room. But they enter that room with the knowledge that what they hold is resilience, that what they hold is hope. And that when we do that, we can move from what was to what can be. That the door stays open for us to engage as human, as relationships, as people who are bound by care. And so if there's anything I want us to really take home today, is this idea that we must plant that seed. We must plant that cowpea seed in the threshold and encourage those who are sometimes fearful or afraid to come and to pass through. And so my question to us all here is that we answer the following questions honestly and courageously. What are you at the threshold of as an educator? Who makes the room you are inviting learners into, creates that room? Who belongs on each side of the door? Why? Who decided? And what does that door represent in your context? Is it a person? Is it an ideology? Is it a set of resources, a technology? Is it a mindset? Because whether we intend it or not, educators can become the guardians of that door, as I've said. And this is where the danger lies. This is a danger that Nancy Klein speaks to with precision. It's that when we hold the door open and we stand there too rigidly, we risk centering ourselves as the determining force of who may pass and who must wait. Again, we become these gatekeepers, even when we believe we are being generous. And so slowly and subtly, we begin to mute voices without meaning to. We begin to evaluate worthiness without noticing. We begin to place our own sense of expertise, our own beliefs about readiness at the center instead of the learner, of the relationship, of the context. And this is the quiet violence of gatekeeping. And this is the violence that hides inside this idea of care, right? It can be very insidious. It hides inside protection. inside this idea of not yet. They're not quite ready. And so through the work that I've done this year, I really come to believe that Ubuntu is important. Being able to name the political landscape is important. And the practice of hope is central. Because I don't think that educators should be holding the door open at all. Because holding the door can turn into guarding the door. Guarding the door can turn into blocking the door. And so instead, in this no man's land of the threshold, educators again should be planting the seed. And particularly the cowpea seed. The seed that can take root in inhospitable soil, that can anchor itself in rock and still grow. A seed that's strong enough to wedge the door open from the inside. And that is the seed that becomes a force that keeps possibility alive. It's the seed that the structures that allows us to hold space for others. It's the seed that becomes the thing that prevents the door from closing, even when systems and histories and hierarchies push back. And so when we drop a cowpea seed in the doorway, we are planting hope as a method. We are planting resilience and Ubuntu as a pedagogy. And we are planting possibility as inheritance. This seed then grows into a plant that's strong enough to hold the door ajar long enough for more learners to enter, for more truths to surface, for more communities to gather, and for more justice to root itself in the room. So planting the cowpea seed is our task. Allowing learners to walk through in their own time, in their own strength, in their own becoming is theirs. And so the doorway now doesn't become a site of selection. It's not a site of judgment. It's not a site of performance. It is a site of passage. It's a space where educators are not barriers, but they are gardeners of possibility. This is a space where hope, political hope, catalytical hope, generative hope, does the work of holding the door open better than any human gatekeeper ever could. And so my message today is that our seed must be hope, a hope that is stubborn enough to survive the rocky terrain of our time, a hope that is rooted deeply enough to resist the closing of doors, and a hope that's sprawling enough to create shade and comfort and courage for all of those who follow.
That was beautiful, truly beautiful. Lots of quotes here from people, in response to what you're saying. I'll put a few of them up here. I think that people at our conference are seed planters potentially. They're here because they want to connect to the world and understand it better. So thank you, Babs, for this. My question for you is, this is also, I think, a personal self journey to be that seed. The path is going to be different for people. What are your recommendations from you for people who want to understand Ubuntu better, or practices that will be more inclusive and thoughtful? Do you have some starting points that you recommend?
I think for me, which is always what I express everywhere I go, is that the true act of Ubuntu is listening. It really is this ability to deeply and truthfully and with an open heart listen, to sit across from another and actually truly understand what they are communicating, whether it is by the words that they speak or the actions that they take, the decisions that they make. It is this radical act of listening. And it is engaging in that practice of listening that allows us to start to cultivate what can be this relationality that is rooted in the deep seeing of the other, that Ubuntu. So that is step one for me all the time, is to listen. Am I listening? Am I listening? Am I paying attention? Am I attuning to what is happening in this space between you and me
Am I
right now.
present? Am I present in this space?
Absolutely.
Okay, I think that's something that we can all work on. I certainly can. And I think it's the opposite of what I'm seeing a lot of in this world right now, of me first, being the loudest, being, whether it's our political system or influencers, or it's kind of this, I don't know, seeking attention rather than listening that's going on. And I hope that we can counteract it a little bit, because I think there needs to be some balance. So thank you for these inspiring words for everyone. This is what teachers need to hear. This is what everyone needs to hear, not just teachers. We all are teachers in some way, whether we're a parent or working in another environment. And so I think everyone can get something out of this talk. So thank you very much. For the rest of you, Bab's contact information is in the chat if you want to reach out to her and connect and learn more about her work. And the next thing on our schedule is the expo, where our sponsors will be, including somebody from the Charter for Compassion, I think, where you can learn more about individuals' work. So please drop into the expo just to say hi to the people who are supporting the conference and let them know that you appreciate their efforts. Babs, thank you once again, and we will see you soon. Okay. Thanks for coming, everyone. I appreciate it.